Margaret's house sat quietly at the edge of town, surrounded by tall trees that whispered with every breeze. She had grown used to silence, her days filled with simple routines, watering the garden, dusting the old bookshelves, making tea for one. It was peaceful, but often heavy with loneliness. She had children and grandchildren, but visits were rare. And the house felt more like a museum of memories than a home. That morning was like any other. She had just set her teacup on the windowsill when the sound of tires crunching against gravel broke the silence. Her heart jumped. Few people ever came by unannounced. She peered through the curtain, and when she saw the familiar blue car, her breath caught. Daniel, her grandson. She opened the door just as he stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, carrying that easy smile that reminded her so much of his grandfather. "Grandma," he said, lifting his hand in a wave. "I thought I'd surprise you." Margaret felt her chest tighten. She hadn't seen him for months, not since last Christmas. She hurried toward him and wrapped her arms around him. The hug lasted longer than she expected, her hands clutching the back of his jacket as if she were afraid he might vanish. For a moment, she forgot her age, forgot her solitude. She simply held him. Inside, Daniel dropped his bag near the couch, looking around the room with a nostalgic smile. "Nothing's changed," he said. "It still feels like home." Margaret busied herself with the kettle, though her hands trembled. She kept stealing glances at him, his strong jaw, the way his hair fell over his forehead, the warmth in his eyes. It was like seeing the past come alive, the echo of her husband and this young man who had grown into someone so familiar yet new. She tried to steady herself, telling her heart to calm down. They sat at the small kitchen table, steam curling from their cups. Daniel talked about his life in the city, work stress, crowded streets, how he missed quiet places like this. His voice was rich, confident, but softened when he looked at her. Margaret listened carefully, soaking in every word, every expression. She laughed when he joked, smiled when he spoke of his dreams. But deep inside, she felt something stir, something she didn't want to name. When afternoon came, Daniel suggested they walk through the garden. The sun was warm, the air crisp with the scent of autumn leaves. Margaret pointed out the roses she had cared for all summer, while Daniel bent to touch the petals, saying how beautiful they looked. She caught herself watching him more than the flowers. His kindness, his gentle manner reminded her of the days when her husband would stand by her side, admiring the same garden. They reached the old wooden bench near the edge of the yard. Margaret sat down slowly, her knees stiff from age, and Daniel sat beside her. The space felt too small for the weight of everything unsaid. They watched the leaves fall, golden and red, drifting in the wind. Margaret felt the silence pressing between them. A silence filled not with distance but with closeness she couldn't explain. She turned her head slightly, and their eyes met. Daniel smiled, and her heart gave a painful flutter. She quickly looked away, gripping her hands together in her lap. "It's just joy," she told herself. Just joy to see him again. But deep down, she knew this visit was different. There was something in the air, in the way his presence filled the emptiness of her home, in the way her soul felt awake again after years of quiet slumber. She had no words for it, and yet it lingered with every glance, every pause, every heartbeat. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the house glowed with amber light, Margaret stood at the stove preparing supper. Daniel set the table, humming softly, a tune she didn't recognize but found soothing. She watched him move with ease, confident yet thoughtful. And the thought slipped into her mind before she could stop it. What if he hadn't come today? What if this moment never happened? When they finally sat down to eat, Margaret found herself smiling more than she had in years. Every story he shared brought laughter. Every glance he gave her made her chest ache in a way that was both painful and sweet. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the lamps were dimmed, Margaret walked to her room but paused at the doorway. She turned back to see Daniel sitting on the couch, flipping through one of her old photo albums. The glow of the lamp fell across his face, and for an instant, she saw her husband there, the same expression, the same light in his eyes. She whispered softly, almost too quiet to hear this visit. "It will change everything." And though she didn't yet know how, Margaret felt in her bones that she would never forget the day her grandson came back into her life. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as Margaret and Daniel stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine from the woods beyond. They sat side by side in the old rocking chairs, the ones that had been there since Margaret's younger days, creaking gently as they leaned back. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was alive, filled with the soft hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Daniel finally broke the quiet. "I remember when Grandpa used to sit out here," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes shone with something deeper. "He'd tell me stories about how you two met. He always said this porch was his favorite place because you were always sitting here waiting for him." Margaret's throat tightened. She smiled, though her eyes brimmed with tears. "Your grandfather loved evenings like this. He'd sit here for hours just watching the world fade into night. Sometimes he wouldn't even talk, he just wanted to be close." Daniel turned his chair toward her. The way he listened, leaning slightly forward, reminded her exactly of her husband. Margaret's heart gave a painful twist. She hadn't thought about those moments in so long, how young she once was, how alive she felt in his arms. Now, sitting beside her grandson, those memories returned with such force that it was hard to breathe. "You two looked so happy," Daniel continued. His words were gentle, like he didn't want to disturb the air between them. "When I was a kid, I used to think love like that lasted forever." Margaret pressed her lips together, trying to steady herself. "In some ways it does," she whispered. "It stays in the heart, even when the person is gone. It never leaves you." For a while they sat quietly, watching the last light slip behind the horizon. Daniel's presence was steady, warm, almost too comforting. Margaret could feel it pressing against the emptiness inside her, filling spaces she had learned to live without. She hadn't realized how starved she was for closeness until now. Her gaze drifted to Daniel's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his cheek, the softness in his eyes. He was older now, a man, not the boy she used to hold on her lap. Yet something about him pulled at her in a way that was both familiar and strange. She quickly looked away, ashamed of the thought. But the ache in her chest only deepened. The porch light flickered on as the night settled fully. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his voice low. "Sometimes I feel like I missed out. I never got to see how you and Grandpa lived every day, how you loved each other. I only caught glimpses. I wish I had known more." Margaret swallowed hard. Love is complicated. It's not always about big moments. Most of the time, it's in the small things. A shared glance, a quiet touch, sitting together in silence. That's what makes it last. Daniel nodded, his eyes locked on hers. The look was so intense, so open, that Margaret had to look away again. Her heart pounded, her palms pressed tightly together in her lap. She had no right to feel what she was feeling. And yet the pull was undeniable. She stood suddenly, trying to break the spell. "I should make some tea," she said quickly. But her voice trembled, betraying her. Daniel rose too, stopping her gently with his hand on her arm. His touch was warm, steady, grounding. "Grandma," he said softly, "you don't have to run from me. I like being here. With you." Margaret froze. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She wanted to answer, to explain, but no words came. Instead, she nodded faintly, pulling her arm back. Though the warmth of his touch lingered long after. Inside, she busied herself in the kitchen, but her thoughts raced. She poured hot water into cups, though her hands trembled so much she nearly spilled. Her reflection in the darkened window startled her. She looked younger somehow. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright in a way she hadn't seen in years. When she brought the tea back, Daniel was sitting on the couch, flipping through one of her old photo albums. He smiled as she entered. "You were beautiful," he said simply, pointing to a picture of her and her husband on their wedding day. Margaret's breath caught. She lowered the tray, her knees weak. "That was a long time ago," she murmured. Daniel shook his head. "No, I see it. It's still there." The room fell silent again. But it was not an empty silence. It was charged, filled with unspoken thoughts, unacknowledged feelings. Margaret sat beside him, careful to keep a space between them, though every part of her longed to close it. She looked down at the photos, her younger self smiling, her husband's arm around her waist. A life full of love, laughter, and now, memory. Her heart ached with longing. She had buried those feelings for years, locking them away in the quiet of her empty home. But tonight, with Daniel beside her, they returned, raw and powerful. She wanted to push them away, to remind herself of who she was and who he was. But the truth whispered in her chest. She was alive again. And it terrified her. Daniel closed the album gently and turned to her. "Grandma, I don't know why, but being here with you feels right. Like I belong here, not anywhere else." Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came. Her heart hammered, and she forced herself to stand, her hands trembling as she smoothed her dress. "It's late," she said, her voice shaking. "We should get some rest." She walked quickly to her room, closing the door behind her, pressing her back against it as tears stung her eyes. She whispered into the stillness, "This can't be happening." But deep inside, she knew the truth. Something was happening, and no matter how much she tried to deny it, she couldn't stop the way her heart beat differently now. And outside, Daniel sat alone with the photo album, staring at the pictures but seeing only her face. The night had grown darker, but Margaret and Daniel were not ready to sleep. Something in the air kept them awake, something unspoken that neither dared to name. After tidying up the dishes, Daniel suggested they step outside one more time. The porch was cool now, touched by the night breeze. The sky clear and heavy with stars. The world felt hushed, as though it was listening. They sat side by side on the wooden bench in the yard. A single lantern glowed softly near the door, leaving the rest of the garden in shadow. Crickets chirped steadily, and the leaves whispered with each passing gust. Margaret folded her hands in her lap, trying to steady her thoughts. She told herself this was ordinary, just a quiet evening between family. Yet the silence pressed on her chest, thick with meaning. Daniel leaned back, his gaze fixed upward. "It's been a long time since I saw stars like this," he said softly. "In the city, everything's drowned out by lights. Here it feels like they're close enough to touch." Margaret smiled faintly, though her heart pounded. "Your grandfather used to say the same thing. He would sit here for hours, just looking up. He believed the stars carried memories." Daniel turned his head toward her. "Do you believe that too?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I think they hold pieces of who we were. And maybe if we look hard enough, they give some of it back to us." Their eyes met in the dim light. Margaret felt the warmth of his gaze burn through her, and she quickly looked away. But Daniel did not. He leaned forward, his voice lower now, trembling slightly as if he were holding something back. "Grandma," he began, pausing before the words spilled out. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding strange, but every time I'm here with you, it's different. It's not just family. It feels deeper. Like I belong here not because of duty, but because of you." Margaret froze. The world seemed to stop around them, the crickets, the wind, even her breath. She turned her face toward him slowly, searching his eyes for any sign of jest. But he was serious. His voice carried truth, and his eyes shone with raw emotion. Her chest tightened painfully. "Daniel," she whispered, her words catching. "Do you know what you're saying?" He nodded, his expression steady. "I know. I've thought about it before, but tonight I can't hold it back. There's something between us. I feel it every time I look at you, every time we talk. It's not something I can explain with reason. Just is." Margaret's hands trembled in her lap. 1,000 thoughts crashed through her mind, her age, her role, the rules of the world, what people would think. And yet, beneath all of it, her heart whispered something entirely different. She had felt it too from the moment he stepped out of that car, from the way he smiled, from the way he reminded her of her youth and everything she thought was gone. Her voice shook. "This is wrong, Daniel. You must know that. People would never understand. I barely understand it myself. I don't care about people, he said firmly. I care about what I feel. And I know you feel it too. The honesty in his words cut through her defenses. Margaret looked away, tears pricking her eyes. She clasped her hands tightly, as though holding herself together. It's dangerous, she whispered. Feelings like this. They can break us. Daniel reached out, gently covering her hands with his own. His touch was steady, warm, unyielding. Or they can heal us, he said softly. The silence between them grew thick again, but it was no longer empty. It was charged, alive with every heartbeat, every breath. Margaret wanted to pull away, to stand and end this moment before it went further. But she couldn't. Her body stayed rooted, her heart louder than her mind. She finally spoke, her voice almost breaking. Daniel, I've lived so many years carrying emptiness. Tonight, sitting here with you, I feel alive again. And yes, it scares me. He leaned closer, his words barely above a whisper. Then don't be scared. Just let yourself feel it. For once, don't push it away. Margaret's breath came unevenly. She closed her eyes, gripping his hand tightly, torn between fear and longing. The stars above seemed brighter, the night air sharper, the entire world narrowing down to this one fragile moment. Finally, she whispered, if I let myself feel this, there's no turning back. Daniel's thumb brushed gently over her knuckles. Then don't turn back. Her eyes opened, meeting his once more. The tenderness there, the undeniable pull, was too strong to deny. She felt her heart surrender, though her mind screamed against it. For the first time in decades, Margaret allowed herself to sit in the truth of her longing, not as a grandmother, not as an old widow, but as a woman who still carried the capacity to love and to be loved. They stayed there beneath the stars, not moving closer, not crossing any lines, but holding hands as though it was the only thing tethering them to the world. The night was vast, but in that small space on the porch, time seemed to pause. Margaret whispered, barely audible, this moment, it will haunt me. Daniel's answer was immediate. No, it will save you. And with that, the silence returned. But now it was filled with something new, something powerful, fragile, and unforgettable. The stars began to fade, and the sky shifted from black to the soft gray of dawn. Margaret and Daniel had sat together all night, their hands still joined, their hearts tangled in silence and words too heavy to speak aloud. The world was quiet, except for the faint call of a morning bird and the creak of the wooden bench beneath them. Margaret had not stayed awake like this in years, and yet she felt no tiredness. Instead, she felt alive, every breath sharp, every second pulsing with meaning. She turned her face toward him. In the pale light, Daniel looked different. He seemed older, wiser, and yet there was softness in his eyes that made her heart ache. She wanted to memorize every detail, the shape of his smile, the warmth of his hand, the way he listened without judgment. For so long she had believed her days of being deeply seen and cared for were behind her. Yet here he was, proving her wrong. Daniel, she said at last, her voice breaking the stillness, this night, it cannot be forgotten. But it cannot be repeated either. His brow furrowed. Why not? Because the world would never forgive it, she whispered. And maybe we would not forgive ourselves. What we felt, what we feel, what's real. But it's also impossible. Daniel's grip on her hand tightened, desperate yet tender. It doesn't feel impossible to me. It feels like the only thing that's ever made sense. Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to believe him, to give in to the fire that had been reignited within her. But she had lived too long not to know the weight of consequences. Life had taught her that not every love could be lived out in the open, that some connections were meant to exist only in hidden corners of the heart. You've given me something I thought I had lost forever, she said softly. A reminder that my heart is still alive. But Daniel, we must guard this memory, not act upon it. Do you understand? He looked at her, eyes full of pain and longing. For a long moment, she thought he might argue. But then his expression softened, and he nodded slowly. I understand, he said, though the sadness in his voice told her it was the hardest thing he had ever accepted. The first rays of sunlight broke across the horizon, painting the garden in pink and gold. Margaret felt the warmth touch her skin, and with it came a strange peace. She squeezed his hand once more before gently pulling away. The space between them grew again, though the bond remained invisible and unbreakable. They stood together on the porch, watching the morning unfold. Neither spoke, for words seemed too fragile to carry what they felt. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I'll never forget this night, Grandma. No matter where I go, no matter how much time passes, it will stay with me." Margaret's lips trembled into a small smile. "And I will never forget it either. It will be mine to keep like a secret between my heart and the stars." Daniel leaned forward and kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent, as though sealing a promise. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of that moment sink deep into her soul. It was not the kiss of a grandson, it was the kiss of someone who loved her beyond titles, beyond rules, beyond time. When he finally stepped back, she felt the emptiness rush in. He picked up his bag and walked toward the car. Every step away from her was heavy, echoing in her chest. She wanted to call out to stop him, to beg him to stay, but she remained still. She knew this was how it had to be. He paused at the car door, turning to look at her one last time. Their eyes locked across the distance, and in that gaze was everything they could not say aloud: affection, longing, sorrow, and an unspoken vow that neither would ever forget. Then he climbed inside, started the engine, and slowly drove down the gravel path. Margaret stood on the porch, her hands clasped against her chest, watching until the car disappeared from sight. The silence returned, heavier than before, but it was not the same silence she had lived with for years. It was different now, filled with the echo of his laughter, the warmth of his touch, the memory of a night that had awakened her heart. Tears slid down her cheeks. But they were not only tears of sorrow. They were also tears of gratitude for the reminder that love could still find her, even in the quiet twilight of her years. She whispered into the cool morning air, her voice soft but steady. "What happened tonight? I'll never forget." She stepped back into the house, closing the door behind her, carrying the memory like a fragile flame she would protect for the rest of her days. And though the world would never know the story of that night, Margaret knew the truth. Some loves are not meant to be lived, only remembered. And sometimes memory is enough.